My own mother attacked me in public at Christmas, not realizing how everything would turn against her. She leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume and said it quietly, but everyone heard. I felt my shoulders lock, my hands go numb, and a strange calm spread through my chest, the kind that comes right before something breaks. This matters because it wasn't just what she said that night. It was what it confirmed, that I had never been mistaken. That the unease I'd carried for years wasn't sensitivity or weakness. It was evidence. I had spent my life trying to earn warmth from a woman who only knew how to measure, rank, and subtract. And standing there, surrounded by relatives holding wine glasses and pretending not to listen, I realized this moment would not fade. It would settle into me. It would rearrange how I saw myself and how I saw her. I knew, without knowing how, that something permanent had just been set in motion, something that couldn't be undone. What happened after this? In my family, affection moved downward, never sideways. It flowed from my mother to those she deemed successful, obedient, impressive. Love was not something you were given for existing. It was something you qualified for. My older brother had always understood this instinctively. He mirrored her language, her priorities, her silences. I learned early that my role was different. I was the one who absorbed tension, the one who adjusted, the one who apologized even when nothing had been said aloud. Over time, I learned how to make myself smaller without being asked, how to anticipate displeasure before it arrived, how to disappear while still being present. The first wound I can still name happened years ago, at a family gathering so ordinary it barely deserves a memory. I had mentioned a small personal achievement, something modest, something I was quietly proud of. My mother looked at me and said, "That's it?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult me directly. She just tilted her head, as if genuinely confused, and then turned away. The conversation moved on. No one reacted, but something in me stayed frozen in that moment. I replayed it for weeks, trying to understand what I had done wrong. I learned, slowly, that pride was dangerous, that visibility invited correction. After that, the pattern became familiar. Invitations delivered late, if at all. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Compliments followed immediately by comparisons. My mother never yelled. She didn't need to. Her power was quieter than that. It lived in pauses, in raised eyebrows, in the way she could turn a room cold without saying a word. I adapted by lowering my expectations. I stopped sharing plans. I stopped asking questions. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself all families were complicated. By the time Christmas came around that year, I had already been debating whether to go. My brother was hosting. I hadn't been invited directly, but no one had told me not to come. That ambiguity felt familiar, almost deliberate. I spent the day moving through my apartment slowly, choosing clothes I hoped would make me unremarkable, not impressive, not disappointing, just neutral. When I arrived, the house was full of noise and light. Laughter spilling from the kitchen, plates clinking, the smell of food thick in the air. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I could blend in. Then my mother saw me. She scanned me from head to toe, her eyes lingering just long enough to register judgment. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice soft, almost polite. "No one told you to come." The room didn't go silent, but something shifted. Conversation slowed. People pretended to focus on their drinks. My chest tightened. I felt heat rush to my face, then drain away completely. I stood there, aware of every inch of my body, suddenly foreign to myself. I murmured something. An apology, maybe. I don't remember the words. I only remember the sensation of being reduced, compressed into something fragile and exposed. After that night, nothing dramatic happened immediately. There was no confrontation, no apology. Life went on, but the damage accumulated quietly. I replayed her words at odd moments, while washing dishes, while waiting at crosswalks, while lying awake at night. I noticed how often I braced myself in other relationships, expecting dismissal. How quickly I explained myself. How rarely I asked for anything. The humiliation didn't stay in the dining room. It followed me home. It followed me into my own thoughts. Over time, I began to see the smaller cuts for what they were. The way she spoke about me when I wasn't present, always framed as concern. The way she praised my brother by highlighting my absence from his success. The way she corrected my memories, gently, insistently, until I doubted my own perception. Each incident alone felt survivable. Together, they formed a landscape I had been living in for years without naming. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or tears. It came quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, when I realized I no longer felt surprised by her cruelty. I felt prepared for it. I noticed how my body reacted before my mind did. Shoulders tightening, breath shortening, thoughts narrowing. That was when it became clear something essential had shifted. Hope had thinned out, almost unnoticed. I wasn't waiting for her to change anymore. I was waiting for myself to stop expecting something she had never offered. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew without announcing it. I answered messages late. I declined invitations with vague excuses. Shame crept in, not because I believed her words anymore, but because distancing myself felt like failure. I told myself I was overreacting, that endurance was a virtue, that silence was safer than conflict. But the numbness that settled in was different from peace. It was heavy, protective, empty. Eventually, clarity arrived, not as relief, but as recognition. I began to see the pattern clearly. Affection conditional on performance, attention rationed, belonging used as leverage. Naming it didn't heal it. It didn't make the memories softer. But it gave them shape. It allowed me to stop arguing with myself about whether it had been that bad. It had been real. It had been cumulative. And it had shaped me. Now, when I think back to that Christmas night, I don't replay her words as often. What stays with me is the moment just after, when I felt something loosen inside me. A quiet shift. Not forgiveness, not victory, just awareness. The understanding that the story didn't end there, that it would keep unfolding, with or without her participation. And that realization, unresolved as it is, continues to follow me forward. After that awareness settled in, daily life took on a different texture. Ordinary interactions began to feel strangely revealing. I noticed how often I waited for permission that never came, how silence from others felt accusatory, even when it wasn't. My mother's voice had embedded itself so deeply that it surfaced in moments she wasn't present. When something went wrong, I heard her disappointment before my own. When something went right, I instinctively minimized it, as if visibility were still dangerous. I began to recognize how thoroughly I had organized my life around avoiding her disapproval. Decisions were filtered through an invisible question. Would this invite judgment? Even when she wasn't involved, the structure remained. I chose jobs, friendships, and routines that required little explanation. I avoided situations where I might need support. Independence, I told myself, was strength. But it was also isolation. And I had mistaken one for the other for a long time. There were moments when guilt surged unexpectedly. Not guilt for what she had done, but for stepping back, for withholding access, for no longer offering myself as emotional material. The guilt didn't arrive as accusation. It arrived as sadness, a quiet sense of betrayal, as if I were abandoning something fragile. But when I examined it closely, I realized it wasn't her fragility I was protecting. It was the image of who I had hoped she might become. Letting go of that hope felt like a loss that no one else could see. I didn't announce any boundaries. I didn't make declarations. I simply stopped filling the space she had always left empty. When family gatherings came up, I hesitated longer before answering. When she made dismissive comments, I didn't rush to explain myself. These were not acts of defiance. They were acts of conservation. Small shifts, almost invisible. But they changed the internal balance. I felt less exposed, less reactive, still wounded, but not constantly reopened. Sometimes, memory tried to argue with me. It offered softened versions of the past. It reminded me of moments when she seemed proud, attentive, almost kind. I let those memories exist without letting them overrule the rest. I understood, finally, that occasional warmth did not negate sustained harm. That love, when rationed and weaponized, does not cancel out its own absence. Holding both truths at once was uncomfortable, but it was also honest. What surprised me most was how grief emerged only after clarity. Not grief for the relationship as it was, but for the one it had never been allowed to become. I grieved the child who learned too early to self-correct. The adult who learned to preempt rejection. The years spent translating silence into meaning. This grief didn't come with tears. It came with fatigue. A deep tiredness that settled into my bones, as if my body were finally processing something it had postponed for decades. I began to notice how my nervous system reacted to kindness. Genuine interest made me uneasy. Compliments felt suspicious. I realized how much of my identity had been shaped by contrast, by defining myself against what was withheld. Without that tension, I felt briefly unanchored. Healing, I learned, is not immediate comfort. Sometimes it is disorientation. Sometimes it is learning to tolerate safety. I did not confront my mother. I did not seek closure. I understood that clarity did not require her participation. The turning point was not external. It was internal, quiet, and irreversible. The power shift she never anticipated was not about authority or exposure. It was about access, about the slow withdrawal of emotional availability, about no longer offering myself for evaluation. When I think of that Christmas now, I don't imagine alternative endings. I don't rewrite the scene. I don't wish she had spoken differently. I see it as a moment of undeniable clarity, a moment when the pattern became impossible to ignore, not because it was louder than before, but because I was finally ready to recognize it. The story didn't resolve itself neatly. It still hasn't. There are days when the old instincts resurface, days when I feel the urge to explain, to justify, to shrink. But there are also days when I notice how far I've moved from that dining room, from that frozen silence, from that version of myself who believed endurance was the same as love. What changed wasn't her. It was the way her voice stopped being the final authority inside me. And that shift, quiet and incomplete as it is, continues to shape everything that comes next.